we are recording this session, guys. So yeah, thank you so much for one more session of Straight Talk. Last few weeks, I've had discussions with almost all of you. Right, I've had the pleasure. The kind of feedback I've got has been fantastic, and very importantly, I've got some feedback to make it even more engaging and so on and so forth. Bit by bit, we are trying that. Getting some very interesting people to talk and so on and so forth, and making the discussion far more interactive also. Maybe if we can go to the next slide. Last week was, I thought, one of the most brilliant overall session. Obviously, Greg and his understanding of how to control the mind and really, train your dragon, if you will, right? And this interaction which happened post that, discussions which I've been privy to at least, post that a lot of people were very interested in this program, which Greg and str8bat has devised. How do you actually train the mind? Is it God gifted or not? So Greg, cheers to you on that one. Agenda, again, I think this is a standard one, right? In terms of the framework, but yeah, a case study. Again, we have a pretty interesting case study for you guys lined up. Would love to also probably post a session more here about what do you think about such case studies. Does that help you go deeper into areas where you have not been privy to simply because you didn't have data and a trivia? We're all looking forward to more talking about England's World Cup journey. 2015 was not the best World Cup they've had, and then they completely transformed by 2017, 2018. I think I remember talking to somebody over a beer and saying that this brand of cricket, where they just don't worry about getting out and just going bang, 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 amazingly clinically, and something which we've not seen in ODI. I'm really looking forward to listening to what Mo has to share. What was the magic potion? And then the open house, again, like that's what we had.
You've done the story already, finished.
Oh man, I didn't talk about the magic potion. Cool. So, and then we open house, Mo also has a question for all of us, and obviously all the discussions, right? So Naveed, next slide, please. Again, an elite players for somewhere across the globe. This is very interesting, okay? This is interesting simply because the lever of change for this player was not an objective number. The lever of change was to see what was happening in the 3D rendering which str8bat has. And I don't know if Buck is here. He was working with this player, and what he saw was that the southpaw, if you look at his on the left image, the bat is opened up. Yeah, and if you see from the point which is on the right side, side on view, in the downswing itself, typically the bat would close down. It was pretty sliced, right? More often than not, his straight drive used to go towards point and cover points, right? This is at a decent level, a player knocking the doors and so on and so forth. So the coach started discussing this with him, and he tried to. He had a different grip. A lot of people have those different grips and pretty tight bottom hand, and he was trying to change that, but he used to go back to his normal thing. So very interesting. His coach gave him a very nice little support. Navneet, Nav, you were there, right? Which basically helped him kind of. He couldn't slice it up during the bat lift time, and started playing with that, right? And you see the trend. Day one, swing speed average was 35, impact was 29. I would imagine something around 85-90% timing. Day 7, 1 week after doing this, his swing speed and impact speed increased, something around 96-98% and increased. And day 10, 57, 55. And look at his bat, face. It's not so sliced. 63% higher swing speed, 90% higher impact speed. Again, you could see from naked eye, a lot of people would say that, but the point is very simple. How do you give that feedback to that player to actually tell them that this small change can make a huge difference. Yeah, and that's something which is what the iterative feedback loop can do. You know, I always say the weatherman gets it right, the economists don't. You know why? Weatherman gets the feedback about what they predict few hours from now. Economists get the feedback 5 years from there, and the variables have changed drastically. So they never get it right. I mean, yeah, they get it right, but you know what I mean, right? So this is a case study, which is based on visual analysis of a player and intervention made by the coach, and he following it up, seeing the impact and moving on. Yeah, moving on. We were looking at our data sets, and now when we were discussing that, you know, a lot of people do play in the V, especially in the nets, right? Let's analyze how do they play in the V, right? And we have some levers to work at. So we said that let's see people when they're playing in the V, typically they're driving. Typically, there are some beautiful back foot punches on drive, but typically, when the impact point is forward, when they've moved towards the ball, that is forward, or they're playing when the impact point is on the crease. Yeah, this is mixed with players from India, Australia, UK, some of the other international teams also. Yeah, 62% of the shots they played in the V is from on the crease. So 2/3 of them is from the impact point is on the crease. And when they are playing forward is 33. Their swing speed is, when they're playing forward, is around 48. When they're playing from the crease is around 44. And impact is on 44 and 40. 9% higher swing speed and 10% higher impact speed when you're moving towards the ball and playing, rather than playing from the crease. I'm talking about in the V, so you know it's not the extra cover where you actually wait for the ball to play during the covers and extra cover. Interesting data point. I think a lot of people talk about it, you know, the shoulder, the left shoulder for the right hander and so on and so forth. There is some data point to prove that when, you know, you're playing forward, especially in the V, moving forward, moving towards the ball probably has something interesting to look at. Again, this is some data point which I wanted to throw. And as you said, number don't lie. Yeah. Buck, you're saying something?
I wasn't. I might have accidentally unmuted myself. Sorry.
No, you were the architect of the case study, so I thought if you wanted to add something to that. I don't know if you missed the case study or not, but.
Yeah, no, I saw it. Hang on, I'll just put my phone on. Sorry. Yeah, I think that was it was just an interesting case where I kind of saw something that was going on, but it was quite difficult for the player to understand. So it was more about asking him if he wanted to have a look at it, and then if he wanted to try and find other ways he could do it. So then we came up with one of those wedges that you put on the back of the back handle just to see if it could change his bottom hand grip, and then we followed through with that. So yeah, it seemed to have a bit of an impact, and he was quite keen to explore that. So yeah, the vision in that case was definitely very helpful.
Awesome. Thank you. Good, you joined in right time. Right time you unmuted yourself. Thank you. Awesome. Awesome. Good. With this, you know, interesting data points, case study, hand it over to the star of the show, Mo, in his English uniform, as he says. Mo, over to you. Looking forward.
I'm just going to try and share screens
yes,
first.
please.
Thanks, Gagan, for the invitation to speak. Really appreciate it. Thanks to everyone dialing in. Hope it's worth your time. Gagan was keen for me to share some insight from our recent World Cup journey and the World Cup wins. So I guess the first thing worth saying is that success is always relative. You know, it's our first ODI World Cup win. There's plenty of Aussies on this call. They've got 5 of them. So it's all relative. But I suppose from our perspective, we've lost 3 finals before. I don't think anyone's lost that many. So clearly winning this World Cup meant a lot to us, particularly with it being a home World Cup. I suppose the interesting bit of the success is where we came from, and Gagan alluded to it earlier. our 2015 performance where we failed to get out of the group stage, and even from our perspective, we were totally off the pace. And that probably makes it a more intriguing story, I guess. I suppose the second key point that I'll stress is that for us to get to where we got to was a collective effort. A lot of people were involved in transforming, and I think transforming is an appropriate word, our ODI and T20 cricket from where it was to where it's got to now. And a lot of people have played their part, and I'm going to single a few people out, really. So I suppose for me, in my opinion, the most credit goes to a couple of people. Firstly, Andrew Strauss, who was without question the architect of that transformation. And all of us at ECB acknowledge that we wouldn't have got anywhere near doing what we did without him. And I'll explain a little bit of that shortly. But also Owen Morgan, another key influencer, the driver, the leader of the culture and the environment. Those two guys probably deserve the most credit, and it's common knowledge to most people, but it's worth saying that. And I'm just sharing a little bit of a story. There's mainly their story, but probably all of our story. There's others as well. Trevor Bayliss, Paul Farbrace, the rest of the coaching team. In fact, I think we've got Carl Hopkinson on the call, who was fielding coach in the changing room for a lot of this. I'm sure he might add a few bits when I finish. And obviously the players as well. All of those guys deserve a huge amount of credit. But for me, Straussy and Morgs deserve the most credit because they were the architect and driver behind that. So, look, we've alluded to it a few times. This was 2015 for us. We failed to get out the group stage. I think we won 2 games and lost 4. I think we beat Scotland and Afghanistan, and clearly no disrespect for them, but we were way off the standard compared to other teams. And it wasn't just the fact that we were losing games, it was that we were playing a different brand of cricket compared to everybody else. The game had moved on, and we hadn't yet. We also had quite a lot going on off the field, pressure on the coach, some very questionable selections probably, and some change when it came to selection that probably didn't make a huge amount of sense. And also quite a late captaincy change. Alistair Cook was captain, I think, in the series before the World Cup still, or at least 1 or 2 series before that. So I'm describing quite a dysfunctional environment going into a World Cup. And I suppose the additional context is that we'd had a poor record probably since 1992 in one-day cricket. That's 6 World Cups where we probably haven't done as well as we wanted to. So coming out of the back of this, it was quite embarrassing for us. And I remember the day very well. In fact, I was running a scout meeting for, I think, our Lions program at the time back home, and a few of us were watching it as the meeting was going on. And I remember the feeling. It was embarrassing the way we got knocked out, and we weren't proud of that. And I guess the obvious point that it stresses is sometimes you need to experience a real low in order to go again, in order to be honest with yourself around where you might have some strengths, but more importantly, where you might have areas to develop, where it enables you to deliver change, but also do it with some urgency. And, without question, 2015 for us was a catalyst for that change. So, obviously makes sense to start there. I'm going to just share some, I've called them ingredients, I guess, of our journey. Important point to stress here is that I'm not professing here that this is what others should do. I'm just simply telling you what we did. There might be guys on the call who listen to this and think, well, actually, I wouldn't do it that way, and that's fine. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. But certainly, I just wanted to share a little bit around what we did. And I think I've got a dozen ingredients that many of which are common knowledge, but I suppose when you package it together into a bit of a story, I think it flows. So firstly, the most important thing is that when Straussy came in, he set us a really ambitious goal. He from the outset said he wanted to win the 2019 World Cup. And when you consider the way that we played in 2015, for us to set a target of winning a World Cup 4 years later was definitely ambitious, and probably some people thought was quite bizarre, if I'm honest with you. But I always think of it, it's a little bit like when you tell people that you're trying to lose weight. Once you say it, you've got to commit to it. So Straussy saying that we were going to win the World Cup, and that was our aim at home, firstly as an internal target, but then eventually it became a bit of a message that he shared with the county game. And it gained a bit of momentum, and it was definitely bold and it was brave. And Straussy had this mantra of us being more brave, which was a big part of it. And that was a good way of us transforming probably what was a dream into a bit of commitment, because it got serious the more he talked about it. And obviously the fact that it was a home World Cup represented a huge opportunity for us. We also had the Ashes last summer as well. So we were all aware of 2019 could be a really important summer for the game in this country. And obviously, winning the World Cup was a big part of that. So it started with a really ambitious goal and a brave goal from a leader. Connected to that, Straussy clearly did a good job of getting the right leaders in place. One of those was him, as I mentioned earlier. And when he talks about the World Cup journey, he talks quite a lot around his own personal motives and experiences as a player, because he played and captained in World Cups, and he always felt underprepared, and he always felt like we'd taken one-day cricket as, I guess, the lesser relative when it came to international cricket, because we'd always focused on Test cricket, and he just felt that balance needed to shift. In addition to that, he obviously employed Trevor Bayliss, who has a track record in white ball cricket, so that was obviously quite an astute appointment in that regard. Paul Farbrace, who was already in post but continued. Farby and Trevor have quite a close working relationship from before, so that was a dynamic that Straussy knew would work, and the relationship between them was strong. And then Owen Morgan continued as captain. I think he was appointed captain just before the 2015 World Cup, and that wasn't really his cycle. But Straussy stuck with him because he obviously saw quality in him as a leader. And it was a chance then for him, for Morgs, to get heavily involved in the planning and the direction of travel and the cycle that this team could go on. So, none of those things were accidents. They were deliberate appointments. So getting key leaders in place that at all levels of that, so you're talking director of cricket, you're talking coaching, as well as captain, was really, really important to our journey. So I think that was a key ingredient. I think where it got exciting, I believe, is the brave new playing style. So I'll talk about the practical element, and I'll talk about how it evolved to a degree as well. So from a formal perspective, Straussy, Trevor, Farby and Morgs, they got together and they drafted a playing style. And I think Troy talked the other week, I think it was Troy that talked about art and science, and it reminded me of this. It was a great example of, in my opinion, art leading science. It was a group of cricket experts who had seen us playing probably the wrong brand of cricket and the rest of the world going in a different direction. It was quite obvious. We didn't need any analytics. It was quite obvious that we weren't playing the way that we probably should have been. So just through their gut feel and their intuition, they literally created a page and a half of A4 paper, a bit of a template of how we wanted probably to move forward and play our cricket. And obviously it's not necessarily relevant to that, but we've tried to do similar in Test cricket, and it's a lot harder to do things like playing styles in Test cricket because, as we all know, playing around the world, conditions change things massively. The length of the game means the game can ebb and flow. But I think probably in white ball cricket, you can have a little bit more of a template and formula. And certainly that's what the guys came up with. And the way we played stayed true to the plan, probably all the way through the journey, actually. And that's credit to the players. There was a few minor tweaks and it evolved. And I guess the pressure of 2015 and the way the guys felt, the disappointment of 2015, I believe made the players feel like they didn't want to feel like that again. So actually it just released the shackles a little bit. And the mindset shift was mainly a mindset shift because we saw it happen quite quickly. I think the series after the 2015 World Cup, we had a New Zealand series, and almost immediately overnight, the brand had changed. So you could tell that a lot of it wasn't about the quality of the players' skills necessarily, but much of it was around their mindset. Some of it was personnel and recruitment and etc. of course, but a lot of it was around mindset. And for me, and guys like Carl will be able to talk about it being even closer in the changing room, was the element of, I think, the relationship that we had with risk, being so risk averse previously, to now having a more healthier relationship with risk. Not reckless, but better appreciating risk in the right times of that. And I think that was key. Probably the fourth point is getting the right players. That sounds quite obvious, of course. There were some immediate changes that were made based on playing style and key roles. So I'll give a few examples, but clearly Morgs and Trevor were keen on having batters who were capable of imparting pressure. We're still playing our one-day cricket previously for much of the innings, absorbing pressure and then going big at the end. And we just realised that wasn't the right thing anymore. So imparting pressure through all phases was key. Bowlers taking wickets in all phases again, so that aggressive and attacking mindset. The role of spin was key. Certainly having a spinner in the side that could turn the ball both ways was important because of the wicket taking threat that would have. And also from a fielding perspective, we use the language of being aggressive in the field was important, and all of those were ingredients that were put onto the template. So there were some immediate changes that were quite obvious ones, and the selectors quite quickly backed a few players. I can share this next bit as part of my own sort of personal, role in this, and that there was lots of ongoing identification that happened beyond that. So, from those guys coming up with a page and a half of A4, I then spent quite a lot of time with all the different coaches, with the selectors. Me and Straussy did it sort of between us, and we came up with, I guess, a set of scouting criteria almost. and we educated our scouts, and we informed them on what type of things we were looking for in our players. And that was a good example of us, as I mentioned earlier. We started with some art, and then it became a little bit more precise. We started to know what behaviours and attributes we were looking for in our players. We then applied some analytics to it, so we could actually work out, I'll give an obvious example, because you can tell from the way we play, but we wanted 2 strong openers that could get us off to an aggressive start. So, we've seen that with Jason Roy and Johnny Bairstow, and previously Alex Hales as well. So knowing that we wanted that intent, we then looked at what characteristics do we want from them. So we want them to be able to attack the new ball, we want them to be able to dominate the short ball, we want them to be able to clear the inner ring. You can then look at your metrics. So instead of just looking at their inning strike rate, we look at their strike rate in their first power play, their boundary percentage against the short ball, and so on and so forth. It was a good way of art leading science, where we could start to be a bit more precise with the type of players that we were looking for. And also what might happen at Lions level that can contribute to us sustaining this style. And a good example of where we tried to do that was, I don't know if the guys from the rest of the world know, but certainly the guys from England will know that for 2 years we did a North versus South series as well, where in our winter we went overseas and we picked a team, 2 teams beneath England, and split it up into north of the country and south of the country for guys who were knocking on the door, and we were assessing them against that playing style as well. And we had England selectors there, England coaches, and I remember the first year we did it in the UAE. I think across our England selectors, across Trevor and Straussy and Andy Flower and the guys that we had out there, I think we filed something like 110 reports across 3 games. Those guys were committed to us finding the right players. So, I felt quite empowered having, a small part to play in that. Another thing that Straussy deserves a lot of credit for was he created an aligned performance plan. So he led a performance planning process. And this was where I think Straussy was, for me, a leader at another level, in that he looked at this as a proper executive leader. He had a process in place that connected coach, captain, selectors, myself as player ID lead at the time, our science and medicine staff, and some of our pathway coaching, connected us together. And we had periodic meetings where we would look at our broader performance plan, all get aligned and adapt it every now and then. And that's a process that me in my role now, I've almost learned from Straussy, and I do similar now for our test and our white ball plan. But without going into too much detail, but Straussy clearly led that process and just kept us navigating in the right direction. So having set the goal, he just kept the ship going in the right direction, and he did that periodically, which was really helpful. And it was his way of staying on top of things. And connected to that, it's important to track progress. So I mentioned earlier how the art led the science. For individual players, we had quite a few metrics and indicators now of how we were performing. So we could compare players a little bit more objectively, rather than just the gut feel that we might have had before. But we also had team performance indicators, and it doesn't take too much analysis to work this out, but we saw that, I think it was something like out of 6 of the last 7 World Cups before 2019, the team ranked either 1 or 2 in the world for the year leading into it, won the World Cup. There was only one anomaly. I think one of the years India were ranked outside the top 2. There might have been 3rd or 4th or something. But in all the others, you're either ranked 1st or 2nd for the year going into it. So actually, what that tells you is it's really important to establish your approach relatively early and to get deep confidence in it. That's something that Andrew Strauss talks about quite a lot. If this was all a little bit late and rushed, the confidence isn't deep enough so that when the pressure comes, you've got something to go back to. And he wanted to make sure that we had spent long enough being dominant so that if the pressure came up, we could deal with that. And actually, that's exactly how things ended up playing out, which I'll get to later. So again, that was a key element of Straussy's approach that he forced us to embrace. It's obviously clearly really important, I believe, to rehearse. And I use this term specifically, and Jon Lewis is on the call, who's our under-19 head coach. It's something he and I talk about quite a lot. The difference between rehearsal and practice. So you can practice as much as you want, but actually having periods where you spend time almost getting as close to rehearsal as possible. If you look at other industries like the performing arts world, they really do that distinction well. When it comes to things like drama and theatre, they separate rehearsal from practice. I think cricket, we don't necessarily always do that well. But we had the opportunity in 2017 with the Champions Trophy to rehearse, and we approached it that way. We were desperate to win it. Going into it, we approached it in a way that it was our rehearsal. It was a dress rehearsal for us. And we actually played quite well until we got knocked out. But we learned a key lesson there. And it was about our style and the need for us to be able to adapt our style to suit conditions. And obviously, we learned the obvious lesson that when you have once you get into a global event, ICC obviously take control of the pitches. What you might have been accustomed to at home might have changed. So our players had to learn that we had to adapt to the conditions, still stay true to the style, but be smart enough to adapt. So adaptation is obviously key there. I guess another obvious point that through that rehearsal, certainly in the World Cup, one of the challenges we had in the World Cup was because we were the home nation, we actually played across all the grounds. So, the Aussies or the Indians, whatever, would have been based at probably 2 or 3 grounds until the knockout stage, often, 1 or 2. But we ended up in the World Cup playing at every single ground. So having to quickly adapt to the conditions and different surfaces in England was something that we realised we had to prepare for a little bit. And I guess through that rehearsal, we got a lot of media criticism. And most people know the British media. They build you up quickly, but they're quite quickly to rip you down as well. And they went quite hard at us about our inability to adapt and deal with conditions. And they said that we were taking too many risks. And when you were hearing all that, I think we had a win percentage of in excess of 75%, and they were still moaning. So, Straussy playing the role of almost getting rid of that media pressure, and Morgs as well as a leader, and Trevor, I think they did an excellent job at that. And all the coaches taking the pressure off the players. And then going into almost that World Cup sprint, we planned to peak, and that sounds quite obvious, but as part of our performance planning, as we got closer to the World Cup, we became a bit more individualised. And Paul Farbrace led a process of doing some individual plans and periodised programmes for all of the players so that they could peak physically going into the World Cup. Now, and mentally as well. And we had an obvious challenge. We had, we didn't just have the World Cup. We had the World Cup and the Ashes. So we had 2 peaks last summer, which was really difficult for us to plan for. And I guess, in hindsight, we've probably looked at how we could have done some of that better. But the reality is, you probably just need to peak for the first thing that's in front of you. And obviously the World Cup was a key one for us. But we were very mindful of that. And I think if we were doing that process again, we might do a few things slightly differently. Having those 2 peaks was quite difficult. And obviously we drew the Ashes, we didn't win it, and we drew that, and we were disappointed with that. But if you look at the last couple of World Cup cycles before that, Australia won the 2015 World Cup, India 2011. Both of those teams, I think, lost their next test series immediately after the World Cup. So it shows how hard it is to win a World Cup, particularly a home World Cup, and then go straight into a different format. And ours was an Ashes, and to be successful. So you could probably argue that drawing the Ashes wasn't that bad given that context, but obviously we wanted to do better than that. And drawing at home meant we didn't get to get our hands on the trophy. Going into the World Cup, having this expectation to win was quite important. That's quite an unusual mindset for the English. I don't think we're often brave enough to try and expect to win. And I think this was something that, again, Owen Morgan was really keen on. I mentioned the media earlier, and they put a lot of pressure on us, but it was almost getting rid of that noise and just trying to be comfortable in our own skin of how we were going to deal with being favourites. If we wanted to be number 1 in the world going into the tournament, we had to be comfortable being favourites. So every time we went into a series going into that World Cup, it was something that I believe that Morgs referenced and the coaches talked about. We certainly talked about it in our performance planning meeting. And David Young, our psychologist, would have certainly done some work on that. But it was something that we prepared for. We didn't want it to just creep up on us, because then the pressure could obviously build. And again, that goes back to that point that I made with Andrew Strauss, where he wanted us to have deep confidence, not superficial confidence, so that, under pressure, we could deal with what we had to deal with. I think a key point was the striving for constant improvement. We saw that across a number of levels, and I'll give a few examples. Adding Jofra Archer at a fairly late stage to our World Cup plans was a big call. I remember being in selection, and we deliberated quite a lot around, the merits of all of that. And not because we didn't value what Archer would bring, but there'd been 2 or 3 other players that had played a significant part in the journey there. This was a 4-year journey. It wasn't just overnight. So it was a tough call for us to leave a few players out. And I've been involved in selection for quite a few years now, and it's not many times where I would say we've had a genuine oversupply of players where actually we could have picked another 3 more. And that gave us a real, positive feeling, in that we got to a point where we had enough depth that there was probably 2 or 3 players that we could have picked that we didn't, and we left out. And to pick Jofra, I think, was really important, and clearly we showed that because he played an important part in us winning it, obviously. So that was important. Morgs' leadership and the way he approached things, and the ethos of the coaching team and the coaching approach was always around constant improvement. Even things like our fitness levels improved significantly as we went through this journey, and I think that's been quite an important element. We also know that when I talk about improvement, and I might ask a question later if we have time, is that usually in a tournament, a theme arises. And then we kind of work that out, that every time you go into a tournament, something happens, something emerges. So you can go back to 96 when the Sri Lankans set off with the pinch hitters and Jaya Surya, and all of a sudden that shifted people's mentality to getting a good start in the first power play. You know, in 2015, you know, the theme was probably just strike rates, and the risk taking of the batters was quite different. And we challenged ourselves to adapt quickly to whatever that theme was. And I guess as we went through the World Cup, we probably noticed that after the first couple of games, that the prominence of high quality fast bowling became obvious. In everyone had gone into it thinking everyone was going to score 350 and 400, and we found out it didn't happen. And it's actually because the quicks bowled quite well. I'm interested to get Troy's view on that, but the quicks bowled pretty well. And we learned quite quickly that actually we might have to factor that into the way we balanced our team. Obviously, Moeen missed out for the last few games and we picked the extra seamer, but realising that fast bowling played quite an important part in that World Cup, and we tried to latch onto that theme quite quickly, and I think we did that pretty well. You know, last couple of points here, and this one's been a key one that's gone across all of our teams, not just the World Cup journey. But I think it became obvious in the World Cup that having a strong culture within the changing room was really key. A huge amount of work had been done behind the scenes, led by Owen Morgan, the senior players, you know, Joe Rutan from a test perspective. Strauss initiated it. David Young, our psychologist, played a big part in it. We've done a lot of work on, and a lot of this came after some of the incidents that we had, like the Ben Stokes incident off the field and all of that. We wanted something that was bigger than just winning. So the players themselves, and we've all been part of this, where we've had teams and we talk about culture and values. It's probably the best example I've seen of the team actually doing it themselves because they felt the need for it. And actually the coaching staff just kind of went along with it. So, and that got tested. Our culture really got tested a couple of times, and some examples are key in that. Going into the World Cup, we obviously had a bit of an incident with Alex Hales. He failed a recreational drugs test. So the players themselves made a call, and they influenced selection and what they wanted in that environment. And that came from Owen Morgan quite strongly. And another example of our culture being strong was when we got into the tournament itself, we, you know, at the back end of it, we had to win some games because we put ourselves under pressure, which I'll come to in my last point. And it was the culture that the players went back to. So I think, again, the guys did a great job there. And then look, finally, we all know that you can have all best laid plans, but it comes down to execution. And you know, game one was quite important for us. We started well, I think, against South Africa. We put in a strong performance. We stuttered a little bit in the middle, probably due to the pressure, if we're totally honest. And we got to a point where we needed 4 wins from 4. You know, I'll never forget the game against the Aussies at Lords, where we got a hiding. I don't remember ever feeling so dejected after a cricket game, because it felt like, you know, it just felt a little bit like Groundhog Day, to the extent that we were going to underperform again. And that hit us hard. You know, I'm sure Carl's got some reflections on that. That definitely hit us hard. So needing 4 wins from 4. You know, I also remember the first game we played against India at Edgbaston. You know, I've never felt tension like that in an English cricket ground in a one-day game or a T20 game before. You know, it was an immense atmosphere. You know, Edgbaston's quite a hostile environment. There was a big Indian crowd. India were going strong. I don't think they'd lost a game by then. And then to see Roy and Bairstow start the way they did, and score I think they scored something like 90 of 10 overs within that first sort of 20 over period. You could almost just feel that sense of pressure just go again in the stadium and amongst the group. And it just felt like we were back on track. And obviously the guys in the change room did a lot of work to try and get us back on track. So to be brave enough to execute everything we talked about, to go back to the plan, have that deep confidence, I think made a really big difference. So look, guys, they're the 12 ingredients. I guess in summary and in conclusion from me, that it was obviously important for us to win that World Cup, as we talked about. But in hindsight, I guess the greater goal for us was to inspire our nation with a home World Cup. And for the game to play out the way it did, felt like divine intervention at some stages. I've never experienced anything like it. And it's quite interesting. In our performance planning, we did quite a lot of what-if planning. And when we got to the end of it, like the guys that we were with at the ground sat together, we just went, well, we didn't plan for this. You know, we did as much planning as we could have done. We did loads of what-if scenarios. And none of us thought of a super over. So it just shows that deep-rooted confidence that Straussy was so keen for us to get, and Morgs was what I think was the thing that made a difference. The culture, the strength of that conviction, having done it for quite a long time, I think made a big difference to us, because there were things that we couldn't have prepared for there. And you know, even I remember that the last over of normal play, when I think we needed 15 or 16 off it, and Stokesy blocked the first two dots, and I remember thinking at that stage it's gone, you know, and it just felt so unjust. It felt like we deserved it, but we all of us know that you don't always get what you deserve or you feel like you deserve, and a lot more happened since then. So with all of those unknowns that happened, it was great, obviously, to get over the line. So, Gagan, that's me done. It's difficult to know what everyone's made of that because you can't really see faces, but hopefully that's been interesting and all of that went through okay and everyone could see all right. And I'm obviously open to taking any questions on that or even anything more broadly. If we don't have anything, I've got a question that might provoke thought. And one of the things I was going to get people to give a bit of thought to was, I mentioned earlier that themes often emerge in tournaments, and it might be interesting for us to discuss as we go through this what we think as a group of coaches and leaders might be the next evolution. ODI cricket might evolve again. We go towards the next World Cup. I know we haven't got one for a few years, but it might be that another theme emerges and the game changes. So maybe just having a bit of a debate around some of the things that we think where the next evolution might occur might be quite interesting.
Well done, Mo. Anything you would have done differently?
Well, I mentioned earlier that the summer was one that was a big challenge because we had 2 peaks. If I think about my role now, I would have paid more attention to the transition between World Cup to Ashes. And actually, even things like, we pretty much bowled, like Wood and Archer played every game in the World Cup because games got more and more important. And actually, if we'd have qualified earlier, we might have been able to ease off a little bit. And maybe that's just circumstances. But I think we could have rotated slightly more earlier, a bit of freshness. And we might have had some players going slightly fresher into the Ashes. And so when you ask if we could have done anything different, I think from a purely World Cup perspective, there might have been the odd thing. But if I look at the summer more broadly, I think we could have been a little bit smarter at managing the twin peaks as opposed to just that itself. Yep. Not directly the question you're asking, but that's probably the
No. Yep. Thank you.
Guys, any point of views, questions, more?
Mo?
Yes.
Obviously, you mentioned that I was there, and obviously I was there for the whole of the World Cup and the Pakistan series before it. And you mentioned about players improving, and that was probably my biggest reflection on the World Cup, and having not been around the team for the whole of the 4 years, but the sort of the last 2 years and the last year, like in its entirety. I think the thing that I noticed in my reflections were that the players that did the best throughout the tournament were the ones that constantly sought to improve. So they weren't just focusing on the here and now. They were thinking about their games and improving their games constantly, even though it was the biggest tournament and the most pressure they're probably under. They were still looking at small ways to improve their game. Stokes' power hitting was one he was constantly trying to improve the whole time. And he'd probably admit that he's still probably not where he thinks he should be. But, he was constantly tinkering and trying to improve his game. And the ones that actually didn't perform, because there were some players that didn't perform, they were actually just trying to hold on to what they've got. So it was one of the biggest reflections as a whole. But I said this to Gagan on the phone the other day. The one thing that struck me when you watched that video is the pressure that was placed on the fielders, specifically from my area. I've used it quite a few. I've used the line a few times since the World Cup. If you knew you had one piece of fielding to win a World Cup final, how would you practice? And it totally changed my mindset of how people should go about practicing fielding, because the pressure and the shock that you get when the ball is coming to you in that moment is like nothing else, and nothing else you can practice. So you have to try and put yourself in those positions and those in those environments and practice as much as you can. So those were sort of my reflections on the World Cup. And I guess actually one more would probably be a meeting before that India game at Birmingham, which I think Mo alluded to, which did realign the team to what its core principles were about. And it was nothing technical about it. It was all about the culture and about the attitude of how we should go about playing. So I guess those were my sort of 3 key reflections on the World Cup.
Cheers, Upper. Very helpful.
Mo, can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
Woody, look at the under-19s in the World Cups they've had. We've won. I think England have won one under-19 World Cup, and I think the difference in the players at the senior level, I know they're more experienced. I totally get that, but the difference is massive between under-19 and senior level, and it just seems why aren't we successful at under-19 level? Why does it take to get through that to end up with the full package, if that makes sense? I know they're younger, and I know they're not going to be as good, and they're not going to be as experienced. But it seems to me a massive difference between one and the other.
Yeah, look, that's something we talk about quite a lot, and Louis is on the call, and he can chip in after I have a go at answering that. I think it's important to remember that when you have global events and tournaments, you're benchmarking players against each other. So a senior World Cup is benchmarking our respective systems and everything that feeds into them, and everything that we do to prepare our players, our respective first-class games and list A games. Now, if you take that same mantra down to under-19 level, we're comparing systems at under-19 level, really. Now, if you compare what our players have experienced at age 19 versus maybe some of the subcontinent teams where, you know, through weather, conditions, competitions, they've probably played twice as much cricket as our guys have played, Julian, is the reality. Like an equivalent 18-year-old in England has had a totally different cricketing biography to an Indian or a Pakistani or even an Australian. So the systems vary. And therefore, with that in mind, the World Cup represents something different to people. It might be that for subcontinent teams who have played a bit more cricket, potentially at that age, for those same players, that it's a good chance for them with slightly more mature cricketers to get together and compete. For us, we find that our guys struggle a little bit with that. That's the reality of it. And it's obviously a record we're not proud of. But for us, it seems to be that the World Cup represents a first exposure, a bit of a shock. A lot of our players end up playing under-19 cricket, and it's an eye-opener for them. Now, we would like that eye-opening to happen a little bit earlier. And Greg can talk about this, I'm sure, because he and I have talked about this many a time. We'd like that eye-opening to happen at age 16 or 17. So by the time they get to 19, they're a bit further ahead. But the reality of where our system probably is that they're getting a bit of a shock at 18 or 19. And then that ends up being often a catalyst for them to go back to their professional game, where I think that's where our players get a bit of strength, our professional system, and then they develop and kick on. So it might just be that in their trajectory, Julian, compared to some of our counterparts, the competition serves a different function. And that doesn't mean we don't want to get better. It doesn't mean that Louis hasn't tried bloody hard at addressing that. But get more relevant experiences into our players earlier and maybe shock them a bit earlier, and then when we kick on, we'll have a better chance of starting to get more competitive. And that's certainly part of my vision now as performance director, that we want to try and do that. But it might always be different to some of our opposition. Greg, Louis, you guys chip in because you've got similar experiences, but that would be my view, Julie.
Okay, good. Nice.
I can't argue with that, Mo. Ours is much the same experience. It is a hell of a shock for our guys to play against teams that are that much more experienced. Their game sense is further advanced. Their ability to set a target, defend a target, set fields, bowl to fields, all of that is greater because they've played more cricket at that age. It would be lovely to have that shock come a little bit earlier, but it's always been a struggle for us to achieve that, and it'll probably be even harder in current and the near future circumstances. But you know, it's an opportunity for the lads to get an experience at the international level and just have a look at where they stand against the opposition. And those who want to get better generally go back and, you know, compare themselves to where they are, to where they need to be, and they work hard, and most of them get better.
And just connected to that, you know, we look at, there is no statistical correlation between under-19 World Cup performance and future success. There isn't any. You know, we've looked into it. You know, in 2010, we had a World Cup, under-19 World Cup team that had Stokes, Root, Vince and Butler in it, and they came 8th. They're now all World Cup winners. So there is no statistical correlation. However, we would like to be more competitive. That's the key. And as I said, I think global events are a reflection of your systems. International level, international teams stay together quite a lot. So yeah, it's coaching environment as well. But under 19 level, you know, Louis gets not many days with the under 19s. So to think it's a reflection on the coaching journey is probably not fair. It's our system. And I think it's just where our system is at, Julian. And our challenge is to try and evolve our system so we can catch up and then hopefully overtake earlier. That would be my view.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, John. So it's a great question, Woody. One I obviously personally think a lot about, and we've had the last 2 World Cups. We've had similar experiences in terms of defeat to Australia in very tight games. The learning that those guys get from those games is huge. I know we're all desperate to win as coaches, and we're desperate to win as players. But like Mo and Greg have already talked about, the exposure that those guys get at that point is something that is so different to what they've ever experienced before. Most of those guys are playing school cricket or second 11 cricket at best. The odd guy will play the odd first team game here and there, and at that point, they aren't exposed to making decisions, because pretty much all the way through, most of you guys will reflect back on the time that you started playing cricket, and when you stepped into a field with a first team, your decisions were made by your senior players or your captain. So you will maybe walk through the decisions. So the difference is the decision making is on the shoulders of the young player, which in our country very, very rarely happens until that point. So they get to that point, and then you have the TV and all that sort of stuff involved and the pressure that is on them, and they put on themselves and their families put on them. Then you can see why these great games that we have happen. The to and fro of under-19 cricket is fantastic to watch, and like Mo says, the exposure that other countries get at that age is far greater than our system provides. So I hope we hope we've answered your question.
No, good. No,
John, it's Troy. Obviously, you deal with your young players, and you have a pretty good history on their fundamental skills. Do you think? How come we can't expose them earlier? What's stopping us getting those younger kids in earlier to get those experiences? What's stopping that? I mean, we're all coaches here. Is it? Can we change the system? If we think those kids are really good enough and we need to stretch them earlier, why can't we?
As I think I'm going to push back on my performance director here a little in terms of finance from my point of view.
You two are working together on this.
No.
I would love to play international under-17 cricket, and I know we have done in this country before, to expose our guys earlier.
Why can't we push them into county cricket earlier? I mean, that's a great system. I mean, we have the same issue, I know, but are they better than some of the players running around? Have they got more upside? I mean, how do you get them into county cricket earlier if you want to get those experiences?
I suppose some of the other challenges, Troy, is as well that, and this will be the same for you, that the prominence of education, academic education in this country does present a bit of a challenge. So in their under 17 and under 18 year, like most of our lads, they only do half a season at best because of their exams. And actually, by the time they get off and running, it's mid-August. We've got about 6 weeks of the season left. So Louis struggles with that quite a lot in terms of that summer access, because that is one challenge that we wrestle with a little bit. And we've got I think we've got a slightly worrying trend in this country where once education starts to get challenging, a lot of people are stopping playing sport. They're just concentrating on their exams. And it's like, when we all grew up, we probably did a bit of education and we played sport and we tried to manage everything. It's probably why all of us don't have high-flying jobs and we work in cricket. But these guys ultimately, they're downing tools when it comes to exam period, and then they pick them back up. And often in a home series, but let's say you guys come over to play under 19s, Louis taking players straight out of exams, and we feel less prepared than some of our opposition, and we're at home, So I think education has a bit to play, Troy. I think that's quite challenging. Yeah. But I think it's something about the international exposure that I think is great. We had a few years where we did do under 17s national cricket, and it might be a coincidence, but some of these guys are the guys who charged into the England team very recently, actually. Guys like Sibley, guys like Pope, Curran. We've got a few guys there who did get a dose of under-17 cricket internationally because we did it for a few years, and it might just be a pure coincidence. But I think they kicked on slightly earlier, and maybe they just had their eyes opened earlier. That the shock and the Greg talks about, and I do think that's something that we're going to try and aim to do. If we can get that shock and that insight a little bit earlier, I think it just becomes a catalyst for development. Louis, I cut you off, mate. You
so the only other bit that I would add on to that, what Mo said there, is is I think, Troy, that we can plan a lot better, and we can space exposures out a lot better, especially in this country where everything is, like Mo said, is rammed into a very short period of time. We need to, obviously there are lots of stakeholders involved in everyone's education and cricketing education and parenting education. So I don't think as a system we get our stakeholders together often enough to space out the exposures that each player needs to bring their cricket forward faster, or give them broader exposures to make them a more experienced cricketer earlier, to get them further up our system. So the team that we took to South Africa, I think we had 8 or 9 guys who had played first team cricket, which is as many, I think, as we've had for a long, long period of time. So I think the view is changing in this country about getting younger players in earlier, more dynamic young thinkers and more creative young players into the system earlier. And the older, more experienced pros are not sticking around quite as long. However, there's goodnesses and difficulties with that as well, because a lot of that knowledge goes out of the game too. So it's a really fine balance, I think. But for me, if you planned it out a lot better and were more structured in your planning and spaced the exposures out over a longer period of time, from the age of 16 through to 19, I think you'd get a better results.
Louis?
Yes. Exactly.
It's Hoppo. I think the one big thing, I've done quite a few 19s World Cups over the last years, and the one big thing that always strikes me is the actual game winning. Even if they play first team cricket, they're not the one that's expected to win the game, because they're the young pro and the overseas player or the senior player. That's the one that normally gets the team over the line, and everybody seems to get, from a batting point of view, everyone seems to get a 50 or a 60, but very rarely does the under 19 player go on and win the game, especially from a chasing point of view. So I think that's the one big thing and one big observation I've had of all the under 19 World Cups I've done. You've had really good, talented players, but they might just get a 50 or a 60. They don't actually get the team over the line and finish it, and I don't think they have enough experiences of winning games that when the tournament comes, they can draw on to actually go on and win a game.
I think that's
so, Troy, to answer you. Oh, sorry, John.
That's all right. Carry on, mate.
I think it comes down to understanding where your players are in their skill progression, but also in terms of their ability to handle the intense pressure. And I think that might come back to having a very structured training program where you are training skills under different scenarios. And I know with training with teachers and training other doctors, etc., we do those sorts of things all the time, learning the basic skills and then gradually putting them under pressure and gradually introducing what we would call degrees of freedom to try and represent the environment. So I take John's point when he said there's got to be more planning of skill development rather than just going out and bowling in the nets and batting in the nets. Sorry, John.
That's all right, mate. You've hit on a point that I really love. I hate nets. I think nets are the most pointless things on the planet. They're just designed to stop the ball from someone going to fetch it. So net practice for me is, from a fast bowling point of view, is I think almost irrelevant. As much as I can, I try and get our guys out in scenarios so they can understand how to develop game sense. I know Greg's touched on it over the last couple of weeks about game sense and game sense practice, but for me that's, I'm sure there's a few batting coaches who love nets, but for me as a fast bowling coach and a coach of young players, I think I really don't like them at all.
John, if I could ask you a question. Sorry, John. Gio Colussi here. I was just wondering, you were talking about, and Mo touched on it earlier, about the level of exposure of players at the under-19 level, and that certain teams have had more exposure. Have you been able to identify, is there a gap between the batters and the bowlers of those sides? I mean, is there a very distinguishable and noticeable gap that, okay, the guys have had more exposure,
they're actually winning the games because their batters are closing games out, chasing scores down, you know, versus, you know, what is the gap between the batsmen and the bowlers of the teams?
Okay, so my observations around the bowling in particular are that the guys have obviously played a lot more cricket, so they control the ball out of the fingers a lot better than other guys. So they've bowled more volume of balls. I think we, in this country in particular, we talk about cramming time onto cricket fields, and our bowlers get lots of spikes, especially during the summer. So again, I'll be very strong on spacing out the fast bowlers so we don't get injuries. Most of our young fast bowlers get injured in this country because of the continual spiking up and down, like Mo's already touched on around the exams. So our fast bowlers in particular don't control the ball out of the fingers. And then as well as other countries' fast bowlers, especially the subcontinental guys, I feel like they've bowled a lot more balls than our guys and had a lot more exposures than our guys to playing cricket. And similarly with our spin bowlers, in this country, spin bowling, even at a young age, is not the traditional way of getting people out. The young medium pacer who's accurate, who wouldn't really contribute at an under-19 World Cup level. He gets a lot of the time bowling. So you get a lot of the county medium pacer type cricketer coming through. But our fast guys and our spin bowlers, the guys that you want to push on to play international cricket, they don't get as much time releasing the ball, so they don't control the ball as well as our other guys. We have two guys who bowled fantastically well in this previous tournament, in Hamid Al-Qadri, who's bowled a lot of balls in his life so far, and Lewis Goldsworthy, who improved a lot and just controlled the ball nicely at the 19 World Cup level. And in terms of the batters, again, we are, from our country in particular, every World Cup for us is overseas. So every World Cup involves a hell of a lot of spin bowling. So if our spin bowlers don't bowl a lot in this country, therefore our batsmen don't face a lot of spin. So my job is to coach to put as much emphasis on playing spin bowling with our young players as possible, because we know moving forward that if we're going to compete overseas and be the #1 team in the world at international level, our players have to be able to play spin well. And have to be able to move their feet well, which they don't get exposed to in this country very often. So those are the two big gaps, really, the 2 or 3 big gaps. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, Louis, I was gonna touch on that. I was going to touch on the batting versus spin one. Like, you know, there's plenty of guys on this call that have been at under-19 World Cups, and as soon as there's 2 or 3 spinners on in the middle of the innings, everything grounds to a halt. You know, the young lads just there. You know, obviously the subcontinent guys slightly different, but England, maybe even the Aussies and some of us, like our guys playing spin in those middle overs, they just struggle. They're not, you know, the run rate goes to 3 runs and over most of the time. And that's something they've just not had that experience and exposure of. So for us, going back to Troy's question and also yours to a degree, Gio, us taking our young lads to environments where they're going to experience high quality spin and playing it under pressure, which is why we've done so many, you know, young player trips to the subcontinent, which is, I think, a contributor to why we've got a senior team that do it better now. We've got a senior team that I think play spin well, and it's because they've banked enough experiences to a degree. But early, they just haven't had that because our domestic game doesn't encourage them to face a lot of spin. It's not there.
Yeah, more, just to bring in an associate country's experience into the under-19s. I would agree with the first point, what you said about the amount of matches that the under-19 boys played in now, especially in associate countries, because we don't have a pool of players even at the senior level. I mean, guys above 19 and 20 to have proper competition. So a lot of under-19 boys get into that league where almost all the senior players are playing. So we get a lot more matches to play with the senior players. And in terms of getting the exposure, we get a lot more, like under-19 players get a lot more many matches than our senior players at times, because they're playing under-19s, they're playing senior leagues, and they're playing leagues all over the country. So I would agree to the point that they get a lot of match exposure, and that's how they get better at it. Because if you compare like some country like us, like Nepal, at the men's level, we don't compete with the test playing nation at all. But at the under-19 levels, we've been able to compete to a very, I would say, a very commendable level. We play against Sri Lanka pretty often. We play against India under-19s pretty often. And because we get our under-19 boys get to play too many, I mean, not too many, but sufficient matches with the senior pros as well, it helps us to put up a fight against the test playing nation as well.
In fact, if you look at it more and everybody, right, that's probably one of the reasons why the game has not been so globalized. And we're always struggling with that because the exposures are not there and the skill development is limited. We don't adapt the training. I mean, but the lesson is not so far away. There are sports which have been globalized, which was not so globalized. And they'll have I mean, we can say that the game is different, but I really believe that there can be lessons learned on how other sports have globalized, right? And because they've also got the exposure and they have taken those ranks. It's a difficult one. I'm not saying easy one, but I think we are too close-knitted probably as a cricketing community, right? And we have not able to have if you will, a very American mindset to how to globalize and market a product. Because at the end of it, as somebody was pointing out, Jon was pointing out that he needs finances, right? It requires that, but you know, it's a convoluted one, right? That how do you provide that exposure, and then comes down to game sense training and so on and so forth, which is important also. Interestingly,
yeah, sorry, Govind, go ahead. Yeah.
No, interestingly, I think Mo had a point. We have around 10 minutes. If you want to take that up also. Mo had a question. Mo, do you want to repeat that?
Yeah, well, only if it's of interest to people. I just wondered.
Just a quick question on your 2 peaks that I had. Like just a quick one. You mentioned about 2 peaks during the World Cup, right? The Ashes and the World Cup going simultaneously, like not too much of gap. How helpful was it to have a pool of players, you know, from where you could literally pick 2 different teams, like a different white ball team and a red ball team? How helpful was it? And was it a conscious decision to shift into that area where you have sufficient players to choose from for the test and the ODIs, 2 different teams? And how much did it help to keep your bowlers, somebody like a Ben Stokes fresh or somebody like a Jofra Archer fresh for the World Cup and the Ashes both?
Yeah, look, that's tricky. And the more, as I've come into the role as performance director, I've realised quite quickly that one of my key jobs is beating the schedule. And most people who are involved in international cricket will kind of get a feel for that. The schedule is very unforgiving. And as a planner, you need to find a way to beat the schedule, I think. So for us, certainly, if we want to achieve the competitive targets we've now set, which are very ambitious, we know that at certain periods you have to concede a little bit. So the way we've approached our 50-over cricket immediately since the World Cup has been to bank some experiences in some younger players and to focus on Test cricket and T20 cricket. Now, as we get beyond the next 1 or 2 T20 World Cups, we might then pivot and shift that focus again. So it's thinking strategically about priorities, I guess, is the key. The tricky thing for us back then is clearly we had some separation in squads, but there's some multi-format players, and it's difficult managing those multi-format players. And without stating the obvious, the bigger pool of high-quality players you've got, the better chance you've got of beating the schedule. So that's part of my job now. You know, I've got to try and work with our coaches and our programs to ensure that our talent pool is big enough that we can beat the schedule and therefore achieve our competitive target. So I think we did it okay, but I think we could have done it better, is my answer to the question. Gagan, just going back to your bit, look, if guys are interested in it for a few minutes, you know, I'll just pose the question of, you know, what do we think the next evolution will be? So, you know, we've seen strike rates rise and they kind of came down slightly again for the World Cup, which is probably natural under pressure. You know, we saw fast bowling again rise to prominence. We know the impact of spin bowling, et cetera, et cetera. Like, does anyone predict that something's going to go a certain way in white ball cricket?
Open house, guys.
Have more Monty.
100, won't we? It'll be the 100 game, won't it, Mo?
I don't know. We're not playing it, so. Well, we might well be. We might well be.
Sorry, a quick one more. This is Monty.
Yeah.
I think apart from the themes, in a way to look at it is, do we see some rules changing as well, where you have a 15-player squad playing together in one game?
Is that a prediction or a wish?
It's one of the wish, to be honest.
I must admit, when we talked about the 100 originally, we did a bit of brainstorming, and look, I didn't play much of a role in the formation of the 100, but I did get invited to a couple of performance-related meetings, and we talked a little bit around almost a bit like the American sports, having bigger personnel. And because my view is, if you're trying to attract a new audience, which we were trying to do, the public are going to want to see, they don't want to see, let's describe it the other way, they don't want to see a medium pacer with a keeper up, someone mishitting it and then a misfield. I don't think anybody wants to watch that. But what they might want to see is someone charging, it's impressive, some fantastic pace and skills, or a spinner with mystery, some unbelievable batting and some unbelievable fielding. Well, how do we get the best versus the best more often? It might be that you've got 18 players for a game and you field your strongest 11 that bat, and they're all bat, and you rotate your guys, you always have your best fielders on the field, and you've always got 7 fantastic bowling options to pick from. And actually, that becomes a real tactical challenge for the coach and the captain. And it actually brings the coach into the game a little bit more around, okay, what's the rotation? Who's on, who's off? And, you know, look, it might be a terrible decision. It might take away a bit of intrigue, but it might also be worth exploring. So we talked a little bit about that. And in the end, we weren't really brave enough to do it. But I think it's an interesting concept. Yeah,
so I think, Troy, to answer your question, I think the shorter formats, as the format shorten down, the skill of the fast bowler will get better and better, and their ability to execute under pressure will get better and better, and their ability to create new deliveries will become even more expansive, and their ability to stop batsmen scoring will become better and better. So I think that might be the next evolution, because I think you tend to see over time batters, bowlers, and there'll be a way that bowlers will develop to be able to stop these strike rates going through the roof.
I reckon spin's going to have a big play too. I mean, spins in T20 cricket, and I think Howie's on the phone on there as well. I think spin's going to play a part, especially when we go to the subcontinent, definitely. But the craft of spin, it's untapped. You know what I mean? It's untapped, and you just got to keep working hard at it. So. And it looks after fast bowlers too, John. You know, if the spinners bowl, then the fast bowlers can have a bit of a rest. Not like the old days where they just sort of waited for the ball shine to come back. But I got spin. Let's go with spin. You know, we talk about spin. I reckon there's an art to it somewhere along the line, especially leg spin when it comes to playing against England and South Africa.
And Troy, by the way,
not so much against India, you know.
By the way, global warming and English had one of the driest summer. Spin is not just restricted to subcontinent, and we need to realize that. And I've seen a lot of test matches where spinners actually won the game, and they are not subcontinents involved. So couldn't agree more. I think more to answer one, at least from my perspective, where I come from, I strongly believe that what you can't measure, you can't improve. I don't think so with respect to, you know, sports is motion. We have not hit the tip of the iceberg also in terms of what can be measured and what other opportunities presents itself. I truly believe baseball has done that. Basketball is doing that. There'll be a lot of insights which will come, and we never thought those opportunities which will present itself to cricketing nations, right? And that's the evolution which will happen, in my opinion. That obviously, you know, the game will get interesting faster and so on and so forth. But what are the levers? And as the game becomes shorter, you know that it provides more opportunities to more countries, if you will. So what's that one lever which one will have over the other? It will get down to a lot more insights and so on and so forth. And you can work on it if you can measure it. That's something I definitely see. Sports which has evolved definitely does that. Zubin, I have spoken a lot about this. From Zubin, if you want to add that one, how do you see actually?
Yeah, just to keep it very simple. Thanks, Mo, for all that. Really enjoyed it and love the process. I've got a ton of questions, but I know we're running out of time. But to just quickly address Gagan's point on that, let's just take his own example of when he throws out averages that certain things have happened in terms of the analysis that he puts out. He talks about averages, but actually averages mean nothing. And we need the actual number. So in simple terms, to explain to everybody, you need to take one player and you need to know, you need to put him into a net. You need to bowl 50 balls at the same spot, make him hit over long off, and calculate all those measurements. And then do that for every single shot that he has. only when you go through that entire process with str8bat will we know everything that we need to know about that player, so that the knowledge base that we have when he goes into practice the next time or he goes into a match can be then matched against all that data that we've collected. And so the coaching tool becomes very straightforward, which is, oh, today for some reason your bat swing was a bit slower. And it can become much more interactive and much more coachable. The person becomes much more coachable. So that's just to give you one very quick example of how we need to turn the screws towards assisting coaches and assisting us in helping the player. And I think that's an area that we all have to grow in. And I think that's what technology will help us do, instead of just talking averages. So that's just one quick one. And on your system and the process that you guys set up, obviously phenomenal success from it. My question to you would be, where do you see it going from here? Obviously, you've had success with the system and with the process that you've set up. And do you see yourself tweaking it? And in which direction do you see that process going over the next year or so, however long you're in charge?
Yeah, so I kind of half alluded to it earlier that we, as anyone knows, when you're trying to lead change in a competitive environment, it's quite tricky to manage multiple targets. And we probably, if we're totally honest, centered on the ODI World Cup stuff, with it being a home World Cup, slightly to the detriment of some of the others. So since Ashley Giles has come in, he's certainly wanted us just to rebalance again slightly towards Test cricket, which probably hadn't had the same love as our white ball cricket had for a little period. So there's a bit of a rebalancing of targets and strategy, Zubin, I think, in that sense. And I mentioned earlier that one of the roles I've tried to play is making sure that we use, at any given time, you probably need to use one of your formats as a bit of a lever for the other two, I think. It's difficult to be really competitive across three fronts, but I don't think we haven't quite got the playing pool for that. We might evolve to it. I think we've got the playing pool to really go hard in two formats and use a third as a lever, maybe. So we've kind of embraced that a little bit of, what do we do with our ODI cricket when the T20 is the priority, or vice versa, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of my role at trying to draw captain and coach's attention to that, so that we're slightly ahead of that curve and it's a bit more deliberate. So that's probably one element of it. In terms of the playing style, I think hopefully now, in terms of the way the guys have played their white ball cricket, that confidence, as I said earlier, is quite deep rooted now to a degree. We shouldn't take it for granted, but it feels deep rooted. And certainly as we moved out of the ODI World Cup and shifted towards T20, we've specifically started to analyse T20 cricket a little bit more now. And we've got probably a few things that we think could just take us up a notch again in terms of the way we play, of things that are important. And I'm sure other countries are probably doing the same. But there's some real crossover between ODI and T20 cricket. There's also some differences. And a bit like Louis said earlier, the shorter the format, the more execution becomes paramount. Because you've got fewer resources, fewer balls, fewer chances to do it. So execution becomes more of a premium. So we're certainly doing a little bit of work there, Zubin, around how we optimise execution of some of our skills at different times and different phases of the game.
Right. Thanks, Mo.
Mo, thank you very much. I'm Murali here, RX Murali from Bangalore. Thank you very much for your presentation. Wonderful. Now I have a thing that's been going on in my mind. Basketball changed from the three-pointer system. Right from the time the three-pointer started coming in, the entire style of basketball changed. So I was just thinking, could six hitting ability change T20, the way T20 is played? Now, each team might have two Andre Russells whose job is to hit 6 sixes in 10 balls. So you have two of your batters whose job is to just play 10 balls each and try and aim to score 36 runs. So that would be 20 balls, 72 runs. So six hitting ability can change the way T20 is played, is something that has been going on in my mind.
Yeah, and one of the things we were going to do, I believe, with the 100, and I think it will happen still, is, I suppose the intriguing thing about the 100 competition is, in essence, the construct of overs has been lost to a degree. So your currency becomes balls. And I think we might see an evolution in the shorter format cricket where the currency for measuring and assessing, as some of the other guys have talked about, becomes what value can someone bring in a ball. So instead of looking at their innings average or their innings strike rate or whatever, it might be, well, what do they average per delivery? What is their economy per delivery? What do they save in the field per delivery? And I think the shorter the format gets, which we're seeing, that there might be a premium of what value in the delivery. And that kind of comes to your point a little bit around their ball striking ability to get out of the ground. You know, those who can add value per delivery is probably going to be crucial, regardless of how many deliveries they face. You know, it might shift that way slightly. And those of us who love Test cricket will probably not like that, and so on. But I think in the shorter formats, that might be what happens. That's very interesting. In our world, it's called unit economics. That's very interesting. Very interesting.
Awesome. Mo, hi, this is Sid. I've just got one question for you. Firstly, top presentation, really, really good. You know, you spoke about intent of the batters before the World Cup, the bowlers taking wickets. What do you think, what impact do you think IPL, Big Bash and all these have had on these England players from the time ECB allowed them to play these tournaments, i.e. the Stokes, the Butlers, the Currans, you know, Moeen Ali and Bairstow? What impact do you think these big tournaments have had on these players in the way they play the game now?
Yeah, it's quite an easy answer. Significant impact. You know, it was part of Strauss's performance plan that he wanted to create enough space, because the previous mantra of the English was, well, we weren't playing in the IPL. But when he came in, he wanted to create the space and the capacity for our guys to go over and play in these tournaments, particularly the IPL and the Big Bash. They're the two that we probably prioritise, because they're the ones where probably highest quality of opposition and the greatest pressure. And the other big one was as well with the IPL is the big crowds and the atmosphere and all of that, dealing with that pressure. So, you know, the players themselves talk about playing amongst the guys with high quality skills, learning from each other. I think there's also something around that I'm sure all countries appreciate, that by mixing with some of the best players across the world as well, it humanises everyone, and actually it becomes a little bit less threatening, and you realise that you're as good as them and they're just humans like you. So look, so that there's probably loads of benefits. It's an obvious answer, you know, huge benefit that our guys have had, and it became a proactive element of what Andrew Strauss wanted to do to get more of our guys exposed to that quality of cricket. Awesome. I think this discussion can really go on more, and I know we're short on time, but seriously wonderful. It was fascinating. I was there at the Lords watching the Super Over, so it was just reliving those moments and lovely to see what went behind there, and it was fascinating. Thank you so much. Really much appreciate your time for this. Guys, thank you so much again for your time and making it interactive. I have one request for you before you log off. You know, we are talking about other episodes now and already in touch. If there are any topics which you think may be of interest, you know, please do share. PM me, you know, if you have any ideas who can be an interesting person who can talk about it. If you would like to talk about something, please do share. You know, after a while, I'll run out of ideas. My team will run out of ideas. So it will be good to know from you guys also what you would like to listen to or talk about. Would love to coordinate that and get that stitched. Yeah, so please feel free to ping me. Any other suggestion? Yeah, please. So we'll keep this going. At that note, I think I would say have a fantastic weekend. Mo, again, a big thank you to so much. Everybody else, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate this. This was fascinating. Thank you. Thanks, Gagan. See you, everyone.
Thanks, Mo.
Thanks, Mo.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mo.
Thanks, Gagan. Bye.